Sometimes we ask our guests weird questions, so I'll do that here in a minute. The Out of Bounds Show, ESPN 1059 The Zone. The SEC Insider Hit this morning is brought to you by Four Roses Bourbon. You've got the Four Roses Regular, which is my go-to, small batch, and then the single barrel. You can find it at Briarwood Wine and Spirits, 4949 Old Canton Road. Four Roses Bourbon at Briarwood Wine and Spirits, 4949 Old Canton Road. Also, Livingston Cellars Wine and Spirits. We're live in the Bank Plus studio. Brad Edwards, College Game Day on ESPN Radio, joins us to walk us through the Ole Miss football schedule and the ESPN FPI total wins, which is at 6.1 for the Ole Miss Rebels. But before we get into this, Brad, it is National Eat What You Want Day. Is there anything that jumps out at you on that you're like, hey, this may not be good for me, but I love eating X?
Yeah, I mean, most of my top 10 would include chocolate. So they have this thing at one of the grocery stores nearby here, and it was called chocolate crumb cake, and I'm not really sure why they called it that, because it wasn't really like crumb cake all that much. There was just a hint of cinnamon in it. And the cake was kind of filled with this fudge. It was one of those kind of like a molten lava cake where you cut into it and the fudge kind of oozes out. And it had this chocolatey top to it. And I think that's my favorite dessert. I used to buy that in bulk, and then they stopped carrying it. Yeah, I must have been the only one getting it. But yeah, that would be at the top of my list.
Oh, I love it. All right, Brad Edwards, ESPN on the Coors Light guest line. So, Brad, a week or two ago, you walked us through Mississippi State's schedule, having a new coach, ESPN FPI, the criteria and everything. And MSU 4.6 wins, and we went through that. Ole Miss is at 6.1 with Lane Kiffin, and they start the season off with Baylor. So I'm going to let you start wherever you want as far as, why you think that's what the computer, so to speak, spit out at 6.1 wins for Ole Miss in year one of Kiffin.
Yeah. So I mentioned last time, but just for those who didn't catch it, the significant difference between Ole Miss and State, according to FPI, is offensive expectation. It doesn't expect either one of them to be great defensively. But offensively, I think Ole Miss, if I remember correctly, was projected about 6 points per game better than State. And we talked about how there are a couple of things that FPI is not looking at with State. One is KJ Costello, assuming that he's even the starter. FPI is assuming he will be the starter, but it's also assuming that Costello will play like he did last year and not 2018. If he plays more like he did in 2018, the offense will be better. The other thing that FPI is not considering with State, and this is the one that applies to Ole Miss as well, is that they have a coach who has a pretty good track record of having really good offenses. I mean, the idea of Mike Leach having a below average offense, it seems laughable, but based on the way that FPI accounts for new coaches, that's what it does. It doesn't look at any particular coach and see what his personal track record is, because there just aren't enough of them out there. It's too small of a sample of guys who have a significant track record that you could really learn something from. And I would say that while Kiffin has not been a head coach for as many years as Leach, and he hasn't been running offenses for quite as many years as Leach has, I think Kiffin's been doing it long enough that it's pretty realistic to expect, or I should say reasonable to expect, that Kiffin is going to make an offense better. I don't know what will happen to the defense, but he'll make the offense better. And so I think with Ole Miss, there's probably a better reason to believe that, that FPI's projection is on target, and that if anything, maybe it's underestimating the offense just a little bit. But that right there is the difference between the teams. And it's not because of what it thinks of the coaches they just hired. It's because of what they did last year. And obviously with Ole Miss, part of that question is who's going to be the quarterback. And obviously with spring practice basically not happening, we didn't learn, a whole lot about how either of the quarterbacks would fit in with what Kiffin would want to do. I don't know, how much Plumlee would have been able to do anyway with baseball. So if anything, I think he caught a break, by there not being spring practice. So we'll see what it does for Ole Miss's offense, but that's the basis for Ole Miss being considered a better team than State going into the season.
Brad Edwards, College Game Day on ESPN Radio. He joins us on the Coors Light guest line. Now, am I reading this right just from the last 3 or 4 interviews that we did with you, kind of batting around the Leach Kiffin thing? I get the sense that you feel like Kiffin, and it may not be by much, but you feel like Kiffin has a better chance to be successful at Ole Miss. There's more confidence that you feel like Kiffin has a better chance to be successful at Ole Miss than Leach at MSU?
Yeah, now if you want to go year one, I think Kiffin has more of the pieces in place to work with offensively than Leach does, because I just – now, you might feel different because you know Mississippi State's personnel better than I do, but I'm not sure that Leach has all the guys that he would want to have that fit his offense, in order to be able to run it as effectively as he would want to in year one. I think because Kiffin has been so much more adaptable. In other words, Leach has a very specific idea of what he wants to do. And he's eventually going to get players in there who are going to be best equipped to do what he wants to do. And I don't think he might have some of those guys. There might be some guys that fit very well, but there are other guys who don't. Kiffin has been a lot more flexible as far as just designing his offense to meet the skill set of whatever he has to work with on the roster. And so for that reason, I think you could choose either quarterback, and Kiffin is going to be able to get a lot out of him. And so I feel like Kiffin is probably better set up to achieve in year one because of that. And then longer term, I have more confidence in Kiffin's ability to recruit at a pretty high level in the SEC. That's not to say that Leach can't. We haven't seen him recruit this part of the country. And obviously, I mean, it's very different than recruiting to Texas Tech or recruiting to Washington State. Because of what you're up against and how many teams are coming into your area and trying to get these guys. And so that to me is the big question with Leach is he a good enough recruiter that he's going to be able to hang in there with everything else that you have to deal with in the SEC West and be able to get all the players that he needs to be successful. So it's not that I don't think that Leach can have success. I just think whether you're talking the short term or the long term, I think I would lean toward Kiffin because of his adaptability in the first year or two to what's on his roster, and two because of his proven record of being able to recruit at a high level in the Southeast.
Okay. Brad Edwards, College Game Day, ESPN Radio, talking Ole Miss and Mississippi State. So for our listeners, the ESPN FPI has MSU at 4.6 projected wins, and Ole Miss at 6.1. They have Arkansas higher than Mississippi State, and then Vandy brings up the rear if you combine the two divisions. So we'll see what shakes out there. So to speak.
Yeah, do you have game by game on Ole Miss? Are you able to see that on ESPN.com? Because I can take you through that if you don't have it.
No, yeah, let's do that.
Okay. Yeah, so we did this with State, and there are two games that are, nothing's 100% with FPI. I mean, it would have to be, Clemson against a low-level FCS team for it to ever come close to saying 100%. But some of these games that we think are 100%, FPI is close to it. So Southeast Missouri State and UConn are games for Ole Miss. It's going to, they're more than 95% likely to win. So you can probably chalk those up. Georgia Southern, it's giving 83%. And who am I missing? Baylor. Baylor's the other one. it looks at Baylor as pretty close to a toss-up. It's giving Ole Miss 46% chance to win. So obviously that's a big game as far as how many they're going to get on the season, because that's one that definitely could go either way. You get in a conference play, it's actually the Vanderbilt game. I guess no surprise. That's the one that it gives Ole Miss the best chance to win, 79%. Home against State is second most at 77%. And we talked about that with State, how there's no question that given Leach's track record, FPI is probably underestimating what State's offense will do. So they more than likely will be better than it thinks, which means that when that game comes around, Ole Miss probably won't be given a 77% chance to win. I was going to say in late November. Who knows when that game will actually end up being played, right, once we finally sort all the schedule stuff out. But, after that, it gets a little dicier in conference play for Ole Miss. The Arkansas game is looked at as pretty much of a toss-up, 58% chance for Ole Miss. And then, and then they've got a few in conference that it doesn't give them much of a chance. I mean, they're basically 8% against LSU and Alabama, 20% chance at home against Auburn, 24% chance at home against Florida. So, I mean, these are games it's not impossible to win, but it's not giving them a great shot to do it. And then at A&M is 17%. So that's kind of what you're looking at with the schedule as far as, where it thinks Ole Miss should win and where it thinks it has a chance. And look, I mean, some of these like the home game against Florida, 24%. I mean, it sounds bleak, but what it's actually saying is that they'll win that game one time out of four. I mean, that's not completely off the wall. I mean,
True.
A lot of times we have a tendency to look at a percentage like that and we're like, oh, it's saying you can't win. No, it's saying you're gonna win, one time out of four. And so that's not a huge long shot, but that's why all this comes out to, right around 6-6 is what it projects Ole Miss to be.
How many people are involved with ESPN FPI?
I would say that there are about 4 or 5 who are probably, pretty heavily involved with all of the things that have to be generated around FPI. Now, there are a lot of things that are connected to it, like the people who plug in all the schedules. Obviously, that's connected to it, but it's not specific to FPI. They're putting in the schedules for other reasons too. But it's funny because we used to always get, and still do, these accusations nationally that FPI is biased toward the SEC. Last year is the first time that anyone affiliated with an SEC school ever worked on FPI. Up until last year, there had only been 2 people who had attended a Power 5 school who had ever worked on FPI in any capacity. One went to UCLA, who was very involved in designing it. And by the way, it irked him every single year that USC was always expected to do better than UCLA. So I can promise you, if he had any biases plugged into it, they would have had UCLA looking better than USC. And then the other one went to Oklahoma. And last year we hired someone who went to Alabama, who was involved with kind of the revamping of this, where we were taking our player level data and using it as a better way to judge, what teams have coming back. So now we do have a few Power 5 people, but it's fine. I mean, for the most part, this thing was designed by people that went to smaller schools, and some of them schools that didn't even have a football team. So, I mean, this is, but they're huge sports fans, and they know a lot about football, but they didn't go to college at a place where they had the same type of experience that a lot of us did.
Okay. Blake, do you have a question? Brad Edwards, ESPN on the Out of Bounds show and the Coors Light guest line.
Yeah, so I'm just looking through here, Brad. So ESPN FPI has at 6.1 wins is saying that Ole Miss goes 3-1 in non-conference since Baylor's actually favored a little bit, but they would pick up their win, Arkansas, Mississippi State. That gets them to 6 right there. So it's Vandy, Arkansas, Mississippi State, but they would go 3-1 in non-conference. Am I reading the formula correctly?
Yeah, that's not actually what it's saying. It kind of seems like it is.
Okay.
The thing that you have to keep in mind with probabilities is that it's not saying that that's what's going to happen in that game. In other words, we go through it, as fans, and we look at the schedule and we go, all right, that's a win, that's a win, that's a loss, that's a loss, that's a win. FPI is, as I was making the point earlier with the Florida game for Ole Miss, it's saying, okay, you win that one time out of 4. And so, it's looking at Baylor and it's saying, hey, about half the time it's a win, about half the time it's a loss. And you get some of these other games where, where it's saying that, here's a good example. The UConn game, like Ole Miss is pretty much as likely to beat UConn as they are unlikely to beat Alabama, right? So it's pretty much the same chance in the opposite direction that they're given. It's like the inverse. And so what it's saying is that out of 100 times, they might actually win a couple against Alabama, but also out of 100 times, they might lose a couple against UConn. That's a game that they might actually drop if they played it enough. And so what this is based on is FPI runs 20,000 simulations of the season. And so every simulation, there is a specific win or loss in each game. And then at the end of the 20,000, it takes the averages, the average record. And so when you get that percentage, like, Baylor 45.7% chance to win for Ole Miss in that game, of the 20,000 simulations, that means that Ole Miss won 45.7% of the time.
Got it.
Whatever that number is out of 20,000. And that's where these come from. And so when you're getting the 6.1 wins, that's the average number of games that they win out of 12 in the 20,000 simulations. So in some of those simulations, they might go 8-4, but there are going to be other simulations where they go 4-8. And in the end, they all kind of balance out and they average out to around 6-6.
Gotcha. So let me ask you this question then. Based on this percentage, is Florida the most winnable upset game in the SEC for Ole Miss?
Yeah, based on the percentages of the conference games where Ole Miss is an underdog, and it looks like there are 5 of those, right? Yeah. LSU and Alabama they're less than 10% in both of those. They're less than 20% against A&M, and they're in the 20s against Auburn and Florida. But the highest percentage is 24% against Florida. So yeah, that's the one that gives them the best chance against. And to tell you the truth, I would lean a little bit more toward Auburn.
I would too.
It's not that I love Florida, but I think I have more questions. Auburn was one of the teams that I was a little bit surprised at. That I thought FPI overrated Auburn just a little bit because FPI has Auburn pegged as a top 15 offense nationally.
What?
And that blew me away because and the strange thing is that it likes some of Auburn's returning players outside of the quarterback, because FPI actually looks at Bo Nix as an average quarterback, but it likes the rest of their offense. And so that one caught me off guard. I wasn't surprised that FPI still likes their defense, even though they had 3 really good players go in the first 50 picks of the draft, because they've shown the ability. We talked about track record, it's not looking at Kevin Steele specifically, but what it's looking at is that Auburn's defense for several years now has been really good. Like, they've shown the ability to lose players and replace them. And so it wouldn't shock me if Auburn is still a really good defense next year, even after losing those guys. But I think they're overestimating, I think FPI is overestimating Auburn's offense. So I think with Trask at Florida, I have more confidence in Florida's offense. I probably have more confidence in Auburn's defense. But if you were to ask me which team would I give Ole Miss a better chance of beating at home, I would say Auburn over Florida.
Who do you have more confidence in, Mullen or Malzahn?
Mullen. And look, for as much flack as Malzahn catches, and obviously, it's a love-hate thing with him and the Auburn fan base, and half the time they want to run him out of town. You look at what he has been able to do against Alabama. However he does it, he's been able to beat them a few times. And you look over, at the Big Ten, and Jim Harbaugh can't beat Ohio State. Like, Malzahn's doing something right. He's not an idiot. I mean, he knows something about coaching, and yet I don't put him in the same category with Mullen. I think Mullen to me is very safely in the top 10 of best coaches in college football.
No question.
And, I don't know that I would put Malzahn. I'd have to look at the list to see whether I would flirt with Malzahn around 10. But to me, Mullen is safely in the top 10. So that's an easy call for me because he's one of the best coaches in all the country.
We got about, a minute and a half, Blake? All right.
Does Ole Miss break their bowl-less streak 4 years, Brad? Did they make it to a bowl this season?
Oh, I'm going to say no. And I'm looking at this. I mean, the Baylor game looks like it's really, really, really a big one. I'm guessing Ole Miss doesn't beat any of those teams that we were talking about that they're the underdogs against. And the question is, do they blow a game that they should win? And then that's where look, it could be as simple as that Baylor game. Assuming that it's played, that the season goes on as scheduled, and that's the opener, and that could end up being the swing game. But I would just think it more likely that Ole Miss is going to lose a game to State or to Arkansas. I don't know about Vandy, but but I think it's more likely that they would lose one of those games than it is that they would upset Florida or Auburn or A&M.
We'll leave it there. We'll have Brad on again soon. That was fun. We may have to just profile the whole SEC West. I was just looking at A&M.
And by the way, I am so fired up to see what Lane Kiffin does, just because I'm an analytics guy, and when he got to FAU, he really got into making a lot of in-game decisions based on analytics. You're going to see Kiffin go for it, not just a 4th and 1, but 4th and 3, 4th and 4. He's going to do some things that conventional wisdom across your lifetime of watching college football says that you shouldn't do.
Thank
goodness.
goodness.
I can't wait to see it. It's going to ruffle a lot of feathers.
I love it. Brad Edwards, College Game Day on ESPN Radio, just went through 20-plus minutes on Ole Miss and the ESPN FPI and walked us through their schedule and what FPI thinks about Kiffin and what Brad thinks about Kiffin. He obviously likes the hire. All right, dude. Have a good week. We'll talk soon. Okay, man?
Okay. All right. See you, man.
Brad Edwards on the Coors Light guest line. The show is brought to you by Mudbugs, 2 locations in Rankin County. Show is also brought to you by Madison Ridgeland Academy. MRA would like to congratulate and thank their 2020 class of seniors. Unbelievable academic accolades as far as scholarships throughout the state of Mississippi and outside of the state of Mississippi. And, of course, several championships over the years in sports. The Out of Bounds Show is brought to you by Madison Ridgeland Academy. Don't forget about the podcast. You can find it on Apple Podcasts. Just search the Out of Bounds Show. See ya.